Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of the hour. Taiwan says it stays on high alert as Chinese naval forces pull back after massive military drills around the island. Authorities keep an emergency response centre active while continuing to monitor China's movements. Ukraine says a Russian attack on Odessa injures 4 people, including 3 children. Authorities say emergency services respond as damage is assessed. The United Arab Emirates says it is pulling its remaining forces out of Yemen after Saudi Arabia backs a call for their departure within 24 hours. The move follows a Saudi-led strike on Mukalla port targeting what Riyadh called a UAE-linked weapons shipment, marking a major escalation in the Gulf Rift. The US Justice Department says it still has 5.2 million pages of Epstein-related files to review and needs hundreds of lawyers to complete the work. Officials warn the process will push the final release far beyond the original congressional deadline. Thailand releases 18 Cambodian soldiers under a new ceasefire after weeks of deadly border clashes. Both sides says the truce eases tensions after fighting that killed over 100 people and displaced hundreds of thousands. Iran's prosecutor general says economic protests are legitimate but warns any move to create insecurity or damage public property will face a decisive response. He says authorities will act against what they view as externally driven efforts to destabilize the country. China says it will impose an additional 55% tariff on beef imports from countries including Brazil, Australia and the United States that exceed set quotas from January the 1st. Beijing says investigations found imports were damaging its domestic industry, with levies covering fresh, frozen, bone-in and boneless beef. Mali and Burkina Faso imposed reciprocal travel restrictions on American nationals after the United States adds both countries to its no-entry list. The governments say the move matches measures taken by Washington under President Donald Trump's expanded travel ban. Those are the headlines for this hour, but our top story right now. The European Union has raised alarm over Israel's threat to suspend several humanitarian groups in the Gaza Strip, warning the move could prevent life-saving aid from reaching civilians. EU humanitarian chief Hadja Labib said that the new NGO registration rules cannot be enforced in their current form, stressing that international humanitarian law is clear that assistance must reach those in need. The warning has followed after Israel's announcement that some aid groups could be barred from operating from January the 1st for failing to meet new registration requirements. Joining us now is Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator and he joins us live from London. Mark, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on the programme and talk to you. Mark, 37 aid groups here have been restricted from operating in the Gaza Strip. They have around 6 weeks to wrap up their operations in providing humanitarian aid if they don't meet these requirements that Israel requires them to meet. Do you think Israel is effectively deciding here who is allowed to help these Palestinians survive? Some Palestinians, of course, will suffer hugely from this.
Good to be with you, Thomas, again. You and I have discussed various issues in regard to aid going into Gaza over a number of months. And what may not be, maybe a number of people listening to the channel may not be aware, is that anyone that works in Gaza has to come then under the influence of Hamas. It's that period for them to be allowed to then do that. It's not conspiratorial. The IDF have found papers backing this up. And also, when you look at groups like NGO Watch, by by the incredible Olga Deutsch, who fronts that. They have been researching and looking into this for many years, and reports then brought to the international community, even if people like the UN wish to ignore that. Yes, of course, the suffering is extremely sad. But let's just look at this. Israel has seen truckloads and truckloads of aid going into Gaza since the 7th of October, since the Hamas then crossed over in the border and did the atrocities that they then did. The Gaza Health Foundation was then set up to bypass the fact that Hamas was taking that aid and then selling that to the people in Gaza and making money out of that, which was then funding their war machine. You and I need hours and hours to go through that, and of course UNRWA is another group. That's why the Minister of the Diaspora in Israel has questioned this. And just quickly, finally, the reason why there is this deadline is because the Israeli authorities are then concerned about what the NGOs how they're made up, who is working for them, and their particular views and how they conduct themselves, and say that they're in the pocket of Hamas. They've also had issues when they in the last year, when they have then had to look at, particularly within France and diplomacy there, the actions that some of these diplomats do in Israel and their connections. There's a lot here, Thomas, in regard to this subject. Thomas.
Indeed. Of course, Mark, this doesn't just occur for the Gaza Strip. This also occurs for the West Bank. And then this joint statement has come out from the foreign ministers of the UK, France, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Japan, Norway, Sweden and Switzerland. They've all said and condemned this move. Of course, the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal said the unrestricted flow of aid must flow through Gaza. A lot of critics say that Israel is weaponizing aid. What's to say they're wrong in this regard here?
Respectfully, I don't think they are weaponizing aid. The amount of aid and trucks that they have sent in Israel, e.g. they've been feeding their own enemy, is unprecedented in regard to any warfare, and particularly in the kind of urban warfare that they have then been created. We could go back years and years and years in regard to the amount of aid that's gone in, money, fraud, what gets siphoned off. And I say this respectfully, it's not conspiratorial. Some of us people need to then look at Yasser Arafat's daughter and how she has actually accumulated so much money. This, at the end of the day, Thomas, it comes down to ideology. You refer to the West Bank, others would call it Judea and Samaria. We then have to look at the Oslo Accords and how this has all come about. The bottom line is, for Israel, it's about their security. In regard to the Jewish belief, it's no, we don't want to see anyone suffering. We have to remember from the 7th of October who started that. On the 6th, there was peace. There has been truckloads after truckloads gone in. And as I reiterate, it's then how Hamas has then commandeered that. We've seen many pictures of them on top of lorries, steering them in various directions. And Thomas, that is what we are dealing with. We look at recently, just quickly, where suddenly, because people have then recognized and they want a two-state solution and all of this, the politics in this. But we are then trying to get below that, and as I'm trying to explain, thank you, that we go for the truth, and very often people do not want to see the facts and the truth that's actually happening on the ground. Thanks, Thomas.
Yes, Mark, do stay with us. Of course, we'll bring you all the updates coming out of the Gaza enclave as soon as we get them. But for our next update, we move over to Africa, and Guinea's coup leader, Mamadi Doumbouya, has been elected president, securing 86.72% of the vote in the country's first election since his 2021 military takeover. The provisional results that was announced yesterday gave him an outright majority, eliminating the need for a runoff. The Supreme Court now has 7 days to validate the results of any challenges that are filed. Meanwhile, supporters have poured into the streets of the capital city of Conakry, celebrating what many view as a return to civilian rule under Doumbouya. Here's how the people in Conakry reacted to these results.
Le président Mamadi Doumbouya, il a fait un coup fatal parce qu'on l'aime. C'est notre candidat. C'est nous qui l'avons obligé de se présenter. On est derrière lui. Et il a gagné. Il a fait un coup fatal. On remercie le bon Dieu. On remercie le bon Dieu. Tout ce que la femme veut, c'est ça que le bon Dieu veut. Nous les femmes, c'est nous qui avons décidé. On lui a obligé, il faut qu'il se présente. Parce qu'on est derrière.
Il est 1h du matin et voilà, on a laissé nos lits pour venir dire au président de la République, Mamadi Doumbouya, merci. Merci pour merci pour la révolution de la Guinée. Merci pour cette vision. Merci pour cette stabilité qu'il a donnée à la Guinée. Et voilà, un peu, c'est ça. Le mouvement Razel est là aujourd'hui pour demander au président de la République de ne pas s'inquiéter. La campagne est à 100% dans l'esprit du GFD.
Mark Sutherland joins us once again. Now, Mark, we just heard a couple of vox pops there, and they were all pretty overwhelmingly positive about Guinea's new leader, formerly a coup leader. 86.7% of the vote, which is, of course, extraordinarily high for a democracy. You just want to cite some of these old other African nations. Of course, you've got the likes of Gabon, where the leader, Ngema, received 94% of the vote. You even have President Hassan of Tanzania this year, who got 97 to 98% of the vote. Obviously, 86.7 substantial here. What does that say about the style and the stability of these democracies in Africa?
Stalin said it's not who votes that's important, it's who counts the votes that is actually important. Without sounding too cynical, as you referred to it, the coup in 2001, and when you then have a situation, and some people are concerned about that within Guinea, is that people who are opposition leaders who are then, because they're not in the country or they're being barred from actually running in this inverted commas democratic vote, then we have a problem. We have a huge problem to say, was it a true expression of democracy? Now, I couldn't, the vox pops you very kindly played, I can't see the translation of that. But at the end of the day, if it's like, oh, as you've just said about Tanzania, Gabon, you've just said 87.7% win. It could be a total landslide, then it looks like, depending on then the Supreme Court, this all sounds familiar, will then verify that and say, oh, isn't this fantastic? But if you are then not running against a true opposition, then we have to question the definition of democracy in Guinea and in this election, in my humble opinion. Thomas.
Indeed. Mark Sutherland, thank you very much. I wish we could talk longer, but unfortunately we have ran out of time. We now move on. And recent poll findings in Taiwan are being cited by Beijing as a sign of growing public dissatisfaction with the Democratic Progressive Party. Responding to the survey, the State Council Taiwan Affairs Office said that more than half of respondents view the DPP as untrustworthy, ineffective in governance and lacking integrity. Spokesperson Zhang Han claimed the results reflect anger over what she called the party's neglect of public welfare, political infighting and suppression of dissent. She also accused the DPP leadership under Lai Ching-te of obstructing cross-strait exchanges, pushing economic decoupling and seeking foreign backing at Taiwan's expense. Beijing further criticized weapons purchases and warned that such policies risk instability. Zhang urged Taiwan residents to clearly reject separatist activities and what he described as dangerous provocations. Let's listen in.
民调反映出台湾民众对民进党当局无视民众利益福祉，一意孤行、谋独挑衅、大搞政治恶斗、打压政治异己，执意媚外卖台的强烈不满。
Okay, joining us now is Ross Feingold, a political analyst, joining us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure, as always. How credible is Beijing's claim to interpret that Taiwanese public sentiment, when it doesn't allow free elections or even free polling at home?
It's not really a competition. The public here in Taiwan is reflecting their views about how they think the current government of Lai Ching-te is handling various issues. And the opinions of China have zero effect on how the public feels that the current government here in Taiwan is handling the economy or any other issues. So China can pick and choose the poll result, but again, it won't really affect how the public feels. In fact, the same series of polls that China's spokesperson is citing also show that the public feels that Lai Ching-te does a better job of handling relations with China than the opposition parties, even though Lai's polling on other questions, such as integrity, were not so great. But ultimately, this is up to the voters in Taiwan. There's local elections in November 2026, and the next presidential and legislative election will be in January 2028. And the public will vote on a range of issues, whether that's handling of domestic policy issues, as well as relations with China. And China's spokespersons criticizing the current president of Taiwan is really not going to have much effect on how the public in Taiwan votes.
Indeed. What more can you tell us about the DPP party, their current handling of course, the ongoing situation with China? Of course, today those war games have just concluded. What is the public sentiment as far as you can tell?
It's soft. The public support level for the two major political parties is usually somewhere in the low 30s. Then the third largest party often gets in the mid-20s, and then there's usually about 20% or so of the public which is undecided. So if we go back to the presidential election in January 2024, Lai Ching-te was elected only with 40.05% of the vote. Nearly 60% of the voters didn't vote for him. They voted for either of the two other candidates that split the opposition vote. And also, his signs indicate that the DPP won't do well in those local elections in November 2026. But on the other hand, they've won 3 consecutive presidential elections, and they do control the executive branch, and they will be the government of the day, at least until January 2028, when the next presidential election occurs. So whether it's China or domestically, people just have to deal with the fact that there is a government and it's been duly elected.
Of course, and with the statement comes a comment that says Taiwan's defense spending is provocative, obviously citing that purchase from the $11.1 billion purchase from the United States. Is it credible to accuse Taiwan of provoking instability there?
No, because the threat to Taiwan does come from China, which has not renounced the use of force to take over Taiwan. And Taiwan has to do what it needs to do to prepare for that possibility and to defend itself. And for years, Taiwan governments have underinvested in defense. So in many ways, they're simply playing catch up. China invests an enormous amount of money, which increases year on year in their defense. Their technological capabilities have improved dramatically in recent years and decades, whether that's air, rocket, space, cyber. It's a real threat to Taiwan. So it would be silly for the Taiwan government not to do more to defend Taiwan. And they're under pressure from the United States to do so. And this weapons package is part of the outcome of pressure from the United States that Taiwan needs to do more for its defense.
Indeed. And is this all part of the psychological warfare which China has waged upon the island of Taiwan? What more can you tell us about that entire broader field of what Beijing is using?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So a lot of experts do cite the online and the cognitive warfare efforts of China. And it's true, a lot of content is produced in China directed at the public here in Taiwan, trying to place doubts in the support that Taiwan could expect from the United States, or trying to convince the public in Taiwan that supporting peaceful unification is in the best interest of the people of Taiwan. There's always a debate around elections here in Taiwan, whether or not China's trying to influence the public to vote for candidates perceived as being more friendly to China. And all of that is worthy to research and analyze. But ultimately, the key thing here is the use of military force. It's not about TikTok or other social media content. It's about China's, again, its huge increase in investments in its military, its ever-increasing capabilities, and whether or not Taiwan will have the ability to defend itself should China decide to use force.
Indeed. Ross Feingold, thank you very much as always. It's a pleasure speaking to you here on NewsX World. We now move on, and China has pushed back strongly against criticism from Japan, Australia and European countries over its recent military drills around Taiwan, calling the remarks irresponsible and hypocritical. The live fire exercises held over 2 days involved missile launches as well as deployments of fighter jets, naval ships and Coast Guard vessels around the island. Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Juan said the drills were necessary and justified measures to safeguard China's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Let's take a listen in.
台独分裂势力以武谋独、装聋作哑，对外部势力干涉中国内政视而不见，却对中方捍卫国家主权和领土完整的必要正义行动说三道四、颠倒黑白、混淆是非，十分虚伪。中方对此坚决反对，并已提出严正交涉。
Japan said the exercises had increased tensions across the Taiwan Strait, while Australia described them as destabilizing. The European Union warned the activity endangered international peace and stability, and in response, Lin said China appreciated support from countries including Russia, Pakistan and Venezuela, and reiterated that Beijing would respond firmly to any provocation on the Taiwan issue. We move on once again, and as AI and chip makers power the city's equity markets come back and set the tone for 2026, Chinese AI startup Minimax Group has spearheaded 6 Hong Kong listings worth $2.15 billion. As per LSEG data, Hong Kong has raised $36.5 billion from 114 new listings in 2025 for its strongest year since 2021 and more than triple the roughly $11.3 billion raised in 2024. Minimax seeks to raise up the $4.19 billion from 25.4 million shares priced in a range of $151 to $165 each ahead of January the 9th debut. Semiconductor specialists Omnivision Integrated Circuits and Gigavice Semiconductor have also started book building for their IPOS, aiming to raise about $600 million each. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.